Everyone's asking me what I am. And I remember this is literally, I'm like 5 or 6 years old. They said, well, Christine, you're Cuban and you're brown.
Spanish, and me in particular, and me saying, this is America, I'm gonna speak English.
We spoke Spanish at home. If you wanted to get fed, if you wanted to get dressed, if you wanted somebody's attention, you spoke Spanish. It was my first language.
We grew up, speaking English and Spanish at, at home. Predominantly Spanish, especially with my father, whose English was not the greatest. But we were a Hispanic household,
Growing up, it was very clear to me that my ethnicity was Puerto Rican and Cuban. But in terms of color, my family is very mixed. We have, white people with blonde hair and blue eyes, and we have, black people as well.
I learned Spanish before I learned English. I learned Spanish in the home because my grandmother spoke no English. My grandfather spoke no English.
My parents were very clear about, my mother used to say all the time, don't let anybody tell you you're not black, you're not Latina.
I mean, sometimes I always felt like we were black people that spoke Spanish. I think sometimes with some of my friends that were lighter skinned Latinos, they might have tried to blend into the white world. Some of us that were darker skinned, we had no choice.
When you look on a screen or in a magazine or wherever media you might take in, there's definitely going to be an impression left on you.
There's no one dark skinned. Everybody's pretty, light skinned, and skinny.
I only see white people, white Hispanics. I normally don't see darker skinned Hispanics. I don't know, I just found that a little racist.
When I became an actress, I quickly realized that the world liked their Latinas to look Italian, not like me. And so I wasn't going up for Latina parts. I was going up for African American parts.
I would get really positive reactions at auditions for both African American and Latino parts. But I didn't look Latino enough because of the curly hair and the freckles and the nose and all that stuff. It bothered me, of course it bothered me, because what I look like and what I am, it doesn't change that I'm a Latina. And you're telling me that I'm too dark?
My agent was saying, okay, we're having trouble. They look at her picture and we send her out for Latina roles, but they're looking more for fair skin or Mexican. I ended up booking more African American roles. I still to this day have trouble booking a lot of Latina roles. Just because, I'm a brown Latina.
I identify with my culture, more so than a lot of the guys that I've lost roles to, but I just don't look as Latin as they do.
It was frustrating for me at the time auditioning, because I would go into a room and, based on color, sometimes they felt that I looked black. Have somebody that didn't know anything about my culture telling me what Latino was. And I was like, all right, cool. How do we speak again? Oh, okay, cool, I didn't know. So I'm not dressed like a Latino? Okay, how should I dress? Oh, yeah. I open my shirt a little more, cool. I mean, what do you want me to do? You want me to salsa while I speak? They would be like, yeah, more like that. More like, maybe, you just gotta be bigger with your moves. You're more exaggerated. I'm like, oh, okay. Damn, I didn't know how to be Latino. Thank you for explaining that to me.
Regardless of the fact that I spoke the language better and understood the culture better, those weren't the parts that I could take seriously. Suddenly you have to explain why I look how I look. And then it gets complicated, and nobody wants complicated.
I think when I moved to the West Coast, because a lot of the Mexicans that I see are a little bit more fair skinned, and the look is a little different, that they always thought that I was black here, or mixed. I'm Dominican, most of the people look at me and be like, where's that?
People usually identify being Latino with being Mexican. And so I even remember when we first moved here, my mom speaking her native language, Spanish, to other Spanish speakers, and people just kind of looking at her funny, like, why is that coming out of your mouth?
I've been either treated fairly or treated unfairly by the color of my skin. They don't look at me and say, oh, okay, you're Latin, we're gonna treat you better. No, you're black. That's it.
So growing up, it was like I felt like I had to pick a side, kind of like either I was black or I was Latina, but I didn't really fit in with the full Latinos or all black. So
when I did move out of the Dominican neighborhood, a lot of people at that time didn't even know where Dominican Republic is. Either I was Puerto Rican or black or mixed, and I was always like, I'm Dominican, ah!
I went through it in high school. It's like, oh, are you Latina or are you African American? And I'm like, you don't understand.
A little bit of both.
I've seen so many discussions on the blogs where people are like, oh, she's black. Oh, no, she's this, she's that.
Definitely folks have said, oh, I was wondering why you had a name like Javier, because I thought that you were African American.
I've definitely been identified as African American before, and it's not necessarily a wrong assumption because I do have African blood, but I think what's more appropriate to describe me is as a black woman who is, of Puerto Rican and Cuban descent.
Morenito, trigueñito, blanquito, amarillo.
I'm one of 4 sisters. My older sister is what you would call high yellow. In Santo Domingo le llaman jabá, which is like light skin, bad hair. Then there's me. I had the good hair, which means the good hair that didn't need any deslizado, the chemical relaxer. My twin sister is darker than me, so we're fraternal twins. And she had similar hair, but thick mounds of uncontrollable curls. And then there's my little sister, who's straight up black, gorgeous, like Brazilian model black.
My grandmother would tell me stories about how she was discriminated, even among members of her own family, just for being a black Latina, and that was something I was super aware of.
Sometimes in family, people are like, this one has the good hair, that one has the... So within your own family, you talk about each other like, it's always about making the hair better, get lighter, the eyes bluer, all that kind of stuff.
There's this phrase called adelantar la raza, which basically means advance the race, and it's this really awful idea that you shouldn't marry or have children with anyone darker than you, that you should always try to advance the race.
There's an actual disparity of treatment that my sisters still feel repercussions to this day because of their skin color within your own family.
If they were to ask me about the history of black and Hispanics together, I'd say, I don't really know much.
We all came from Africa. We all came as slaves. It just depends on who colonized what country. In our islands, we were colonized by the Spaniards, so that's why we speak Spanish. Last time I checked, roughly 48% of Latin America is black.
Most of us can't, won't deny who we are.
I have to say it. I'm a woman of color, I'm a morenita, A lot of Latinos, especially Caribbean, come on, we're African. We descend from African, the real Africans.
The idea of blackness among Latinos isn't really discussed as much as it should, and it's tragic because so much of that African culture is so dominant.
People will say, I love that you admit that you're black and Latina, which I always think is such a strange way of putting it. What do you mean, I admit it?
I'm a black woman. I am. Culturally, African American culture is different. I would say I'm more Afro-Caribbean. My heritage with my culture, who I am, I'm not gonna choose. I am both.
I literally try to just mess up the census. It's such a flawed system. So I check every single thing that applies, across the board.
You're not one or the other. You're both. And you should be proud of being both and not be embarrassed or ashamed of it. There's nothing to be ashamed of.
I'm African. I know that for a fact. I think my ancestors are African,
Latinos, we do identify as black because it's either white or black.
Spanish